A crown once gifted by Napoleon himself ended up on the head of a nun in the heart of America. How can two worlds so far apart, the splendor of empires and the silence of a monastic cell, fit into a single life? And between them, the story of a woman who carried within her a princess, an exile, a mother of 6 children, and the founder of a monastery. On September 14, 1991, in a monastery hidden among the green hills of Pennsylvania, a woman quietly departed this world, a woman whose life could have inspired a novel. The newspapers had long forgotten her name, but it occasionally appeared in antique catalogs, Princess Ileana of Romania. And not by accident. There was one object that still fascinated collectors, historians, and romantics alike, a delicate tiara of diamond scrolls. Once upon a time, it had belonged to Empress Marie-Louise, the wife of Napoleon. Then it passed through the hands of Spanish infantas, Austrian archduchesses, and finally appeared at the wedding of a Romanian princess who vowed to love until Europe itself crumbled beneath its own weight. Ileana was not a woman born for the shadows. The daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Marie of Romania, a queen both charismatic and strong-willed who combined Oriental robes with English dignity, Ileana grew up surrounded by palace splendor, the murmur of soirees, and the cold glitter of chandeliers. But reality rarely follows the script of fairy tales. After the First World War, monarchies across Europe began to fall one by one, like houses of cards. Romania held on, but the cracks were already visible. When in 1931 Ileana married Archduke Anton of Austria, many believed the union of two royal houses would withstand the winds of change. At the wedding ball in Pellish Castle, the famous Napoleon tiara sparkled on her head. It shone under candlelight as if history itself had leaned over the young bride to bless her marriage. But this wedding was less a love story and more a pact between two fading dynasties. Ileana later recalled the moment with irony in her memoirs. "A princess spends very little of her life wearing a diadem," she wrote, and it was true. Her title did not protect her from the boredom of marriage, from family tensions, or from the collapse of illusions. 4 years later, in Vienna, she wore the tiara again, this time at a ball organized by the Legitimist Party, still dreaming of restoring monarchies. Everything was beautiful, perfect, and yet, beneath the glitter, lurked unease. Europe was marching toward the edge. First, Austria fell, then Romania. With each passing year, Ileana lost not only her homeland, but also any sense of stability. She was forced to flee, first to Argentina, then to the United States. To fund her children's education, she sold the famous sapphire Kokoschnik tiara, but not Napoleon's diadem. That, for some reason, she kept. Perhaps because it was never just a jewel. It was a link to the past, a reminder that even in exile and uncertainty, something remained that tied her to her history, her lineage, her name. In 1954, her daughter Alexandra wore the tiara at a debutante ball in New York. It glittered again, not just with diamonds, but with memory. And in 1962, at Alexandra's wedding, it appeared once more, closing a silent circle. After that, silence. Far from palaces and ballrooms, Ileana became an Orthodox nun. She founded a monastery, the first English-speaking Orthodox monastery in North America. There, she lived until the end of her days as Mother Alexandra, surrounded by prayer, peace, and simplicity. She never wore the tiara again. Her hair was now covered by a black veil, her hands occupied by prayer beads. Yet the diadem, like her life, continued to shine in memory, a bridge between lost splendor and the peace she finally found. In 2007, the tiara appeared at an exhibition in Vienna. Today, its fate remains a mystery. Perhaps it still belongs to her descendants, along with Bran Castle, returned to the family by the Romanian government in 2009. Thus, this story lingers, suspended between reality and legend, between ballrooms and monastic walls, between a diadem that once united empires and a woman who chose silence over a throne. In the photographs from those years, she appears serene, a high forehead, a clear gaze, a restrained yet warm smile. And yet, behind that marble composure was a young woman raised to believe in duty and taught not to expect happiness. Princess Ileana was beloved by the people, but not by fate. When the time came to choose a husband, she did not truly choose at all. Others decided for her, as always happened in those houses where dynastic interests outweighed personal desires. Archduke Anton was a kind, quiet man, loyal to his family. He had all the qualities one was supposed to have, but there was no fire in him, no daring, nor was there understanding. Their union became a marriage of two coats of arms rather than two hearts. Soon after the wedding, they moved to Austria, to one of the villas at the foot of the Alps. On the surface, everything seemed orderly and calm, but only on the surface. Beneath that calm ran a faint, uneasy tension. The old Europe was changing. Vienna, once the heart of an empire, had become a city of memories. The aristocracy still held balls, but under the music and chandeliers was a desperate need to pretend that nothing had changed. At one of these balls, in 1936, Elena wore the famous tiara again, the gift from her father-in-law, the jewel passed down through generations. She shone, yes, but not like a woman at the height of her glory, rather like a symbol, a living remnant of a fading age. Her smile that night was flawless and ever so slightly sad. Meanwhile, the house into which she had married was beginning to crumble. The Habsburgs were now a historical exhibit rather than a ruling dynasty. In the East, a new threat was growing. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria. Anton, though he never openly supported the Nazis, did not resist them either. And that was a breaking point. Elena, raised in the belief in service and responsibility, could not accept such passivity. She returned to Romania with her children, no longer as a wife, but as a mother and a citizen. The kingdom was shaking with internal tensions. Her brother, King Carol II, was losing support, ruling with an iron hand while surrounded by personal scandals. Elena criticized him openly, not out of spite, but out of conviction. She devoted herself to helping the wounded, opening hospitals, speaking on the radio. She became a voice of reason in a country on the brink. But fate was relentless. In 1947, Romania fell under communist rule. The monarchy was abolished. Elena had to leave again, this time for good. Imagine a woman who had lived through 2 wars, 2 exiles, a broken marriage, now with no home. She took her children, a few suitcases, and the tiara, the very same one that had sparkled at her wedding. Why keep that one jewel and not another, more practical? Perhaps because it held the last thread tying her to a past she could not erase, a memory, a symbol, a secret. They went first to Argentina, later to the United States. There, among unfamiliar streets and a foreign language, Ileana had to become someone else. Not a princess, not an archduchess, just a woman who had to survive. She worked, gave lectures, supported charities. She cooked for her children and answered letters from people who still addressed her as Your Royal Highness. One morning, during a walk in New York, a woman with a foreign accent recognized her. "Excuse me, are you Princess Ileana?" Ileana smiled and nodded. "Not anymore," she replied. "Now I'm just a mother." But that evening, when her daughter Alexandra appeared at the debutante ball with the tiara on her head, the room fell silent for a moment. People didn't just see a beautiful young girl. they saw a shadow of history, a princess who had not vanished but had stepped aside for a new life to begin. Ileana watched from afar. She did not intervene. She didn't adjust the tiara. She only looked on. Because she knew a crown does not make a queen. But sometimes it helps one remember who they were and why they are still standing. The jewels in this story are not symbols of wealth. They are capsules of time. They carry within them entire lives. And for Ileana, another transformation still awaited, the last one, and perhaps the most unexpected. Sometimes, destiny leaves a person with one final object, not as comfort, but as a sign, a reminder that the game isn't over yet, even if the entire board seems to have been overturned. For Ileana, that object was the tiara. Not the grandest of all the jewels that had adorned the heads of Europe's monarchs, but perhaps the most personal. It's hard to imagine that in the quiet of a modest house somewhere in the American countryside, among the voices of her children and the smell of morning coffee, there lay a jewel once gifted by Napoleon himself. Yes, the same emperor who conquered half of Europe and gave diamonds to his wife Marie-Louise not only as tokens of affection, but as symbols of power. This tiara, with its delicate diamond scrolls, was a gift that spoke louder than words. After Marie-Louise's death, the tiara traveled a long road through the generations of the Habsburgs. It appeared and disappeared in official portraits, sometimes not even worn on the head, but at the waist, like Infanta Blanca of Spain, wife of Archduke Leopold Salvator, once did. Their daughter, Archduchess Dolores, posed with it in a solemn portrait, its graceful curves echoing the lines of her face, proud, serene, and carrying a quiet, almost prophetic weariness. But perhaps the most symbolic moment came when Leopold Salvator passed the tiara to his daughter-in-law, Princess Ileana of Romania. Not as an official heirloom, not because protocol demanded it, but as a personal gift. Perhaps he sensed that it would be she and no one else who would carry it through the storms of the 20th century. At Ileana's wedding in 1931 in Pelish Castle, the Gothic and romantic heart of Romania's monarchy, the tiara shone not just as an ornament, but as a character in its own right. The young princess wore it with dignity, but in her eyes there was more, a subtle tension, a sense that this marriage was less a fairy tale and more a silent pact between two dynasties already sensing the shadow of decline. The jewel sparkled, yes, but like a mask, beautiful, solemn, and a little distant. Years later, in her memoirs, Ileana would recall that moment with faint irony. I might as well begin by telling you frankly that a princess spends very little of her life wearing a diadem. With those words, she disarmed the whole theater of royal etiquette. She wrote about the Viennese balls, the protocols, the formalities, all with the calm of someone who no longer believed in splendor as a promise of happiness. And yet, when she wore the tiara again a few years later, not in Bucharest, but in Vienna's Hofburg Palace, everything felt different. It was 1936, at the Legitimist Ball. At first glance, it was a scene pulled straight from the past. Crystal chandeliers, waltzes, velvet gowns, and gilded halls. But beneath the splendor, there was an odd echo, almost a forewarning. The monarchists who still dreamed of restoring Europe's thrones danced as if they could stop time itself. Ileana, young but no longer naive, joined in with the same elegance one uses to accept a lost cause. She wore the tiara like someone carrying a question that has no answer. The chandeliers fractured their light across the diamonds, and the tiara's scrolls cast shadows on the walls, as if sketching maps of vanished empires. It was more than a jewel. It was a declaration, fragile, silent, almost defiant. Of course, the tiara could not protect her from reality. Austria would soon fall. Romania would be devoured by dictatorships and war. Her marriage would collapse. She herself would be forced into exile, but the tiara would survive. And not only survive, it would continue to live in drawers, in photographs, in the family's collective memory. Its design, almost musical, seemed to carry a message. Even when thrones crumble, there are objects that preserve more truth than hymns or manifestos ever could. The tiara had become part of another world, the feminine, the intimate, the one that belonged not to kings or governments, but to mothers and daughters, to memory and continuity. And in that lay its real power. Sometimes jewels speak louder than words. They are not just shape and sparkle, they are moments frozen in time, entire lives captured in silence. The tiara that once belonged to an empress, that had passed through the grand ballrooms of Vienna and the corridors of Romanian castles, now rested in the wardrobe of a modest American house. Not in a velvet case, but perhaps wrapped in a simple piece of cloth. And yet, its story was not over. In New York, a city of steel and electric light where modernity gleamed in shop windows rather than palaces, the old world still found small cracks through which it could peer. In the autumn of 1954, at the Plaza Hotel, the traditional debutante ball was held. For most young women, it was just a social ritual, a formal entrance into society, but for one of them, it carried a different weight. Alexandra von Habsburg, daughter of the exiled Romanian princess and the Austrian archduke, stepped into the spotlight with a past heavier than any title. And on her head, like a secret, sparkled the same tiara that had traveled through empires, wars, and exile. The jewel did not seem like a relic of the past, but like something alive. Its diamonds reflected not only the glow of the chandeliers, but also the memory of those who had worn it before. The empress, the archduchess, the princess, and now a young girl, unknown to the New York public, but with the same posture her mother had once carried in days of royal splendor. People saw an elegant scene, flawless and refined. But for Ileana, watching from a balcony with the quiet composure of someone no longer seeking the stage, it was more than a ball. It was a bridge between the past and the future. She did not intervene. She didn't adjust the tiara on her daughter's head, didn't correct anything. She simply watched, because she knew some things are not passed down with instructions, but with silence. 8 years later, in 1962, when Alexandra married Duke Eugen Eberhard of Württemberg, the tiara appeared once again. There were no longer empires, no thrones, no headlines in the newspapers. But it shone all the same, quietly, like a letter read in a whisper. And then, silence. The jewel disappeared from photos and ballrooms. No more public appearances, no more portraits, no more breathless audiences waiting for its sparkle. But that did not mean it was forgotten. During those same years, Ileana withdrew further from the outside world. Not with bitterness, but with deliberate calm. She founded a monastery, wrote, prayed, and listened. And perhaps in some drawer of a monastic cell, the tiara remained, wrapped in a scarf, transformed from a symbol of luxury into a family relic, a memory with a heartbeat of its own. Because even in silence, some things keep speaking. You just have to know how to listen. When everything is taken from a person, homeland, home, name, title, what remains is only what lives within. Princess Ileana, who had lost 2 kingdoms, never asked the world for pity. She began to rebuild herself from fragments, memory, faith, and dignity. America did not greet her with fanfare, but with the quiet lines of the immigration office. For this new country, she was no princess, only a woman with children and a foreign accent. And yet it was here, among strange streets and an unfamiliar language, that perhaps the most authentic part of her life began. She did not cling to the past. She opened doors. She gave lectures on morality, freedom, the price one pays for convictions. Princess Ialena became Mother Ialena. She wrote letters, organized aid for those in need, spoke of dignity, not the kind tied to palaces, but the kind one carries inside. The tiara, meanwhile, remained silent. It never appeared in public again, but it was never sold. And that is remarkable. Ileana had to sell many jewels to pay for her children's education. Among them was the famous sapphire Kokoshnik tiara, a legendary piece that had once shone in her hair. That adornment, celebrated in newspapers, vanished like the kingdoms themselves. But Napoleon's tiara remained. Perhaps because it was never just a symbol of power. Unlike the Kokoshnik, it did not shout, it did not dominate. Its beauty was delicate, restrained. It was less a trophy than a talisman, a memory, not of status, but of roots. Perhaps in it, Ileana saw not only the past, but also a light for the future. When her daughter Alexandra wore the tiara in public and later carried it into her own married life, the jewel became part of another story. It was no longer royal, but family. Its glow belonged not to the halls of power, but to the intimacy of a new generation. During those years, Ileana turned more and more toward the spiritual, not as an escape, not as rebellion, as a return. She understood that too much of her life had been lived not by her own choice, but by duty, by protocol, by history itself. Now, with her children grown and the world changing, came the moment to decide for herself. And she chose the monastery, not one already built by others, but one she would create herself. In 1967, in the hills near Elwood, Pennsylvania, a small Orthodox community was born, English-speaking, the first of its kind in all of North America. Women of different ages and backgrounds came there not to hide from the world, but to find peace. There was no gold, no bulls, no titles. There were chants, gardens, warm bread, silence. And at the center of it all, Mother Alexandra. That was her name now. She did not deny her past, but she did not display it either. She spoke with visitors simply, sometimes with humor. Her gaze no longer sought approval. It looked inward. In a cell where the walls breathed calm, perhaps the tiara was still kept, wrapped in a scarf, hidden in a wooden box. Not as a relic of power, but as a reminder that what sparkles can become light if it is not held onto, but passed on. In 1981, she stepped down as abbess, but stayed at the monastery until the very end. And when, in September 1991, her life came to a close, the world hardly noticed. There were no headlines, no orchestras. Only in one corner of Pennsylvania, the wind whispered her name through the trees. But the story did not vanish. It simply changed its form. And the tiara? It was still there, or somewhere very close. They called her Mother Alexandra now, but in every line of her letters, the voice of Ileana still resonated. Princess, exile, keeper of memory. After stepping down as abbess, the monastery became her final home. Not a temporary refuge, not a hiding place, but the one place where she could simply exist, without titles, without protocol, without the weight of a name behind her. Mornings began with prayer. Then came the small tasks, sweeping the refectory, tending the garden, speaking with the sisters. And later, the time for silence. In those hours, she wrote. Pages filled with her even handwriting carried reflections, memories, hope. Sometimes she wrote about her mother, Queen Marie, a woman in whom storm and sunlight coexisted. At other times, about the marriage that had taught her endurance, about the war that had taken her homeland, about her children who remained her greatest pride. But more than anything, she wrote about meaning, about what remains when everything external falls away. The tiara stayed close. It no longer appeared in public. No more photographs, no more balls. But there was never any sign it had been sold or lost. Until 2007, 16 years after Mother Alexandra had left this world, the tiara suddenly reappeared. Not as a trophy, not as a curiosity for collectors, but as part of an exhibition in Vienna dedicated to the historic jewels of the Habsburgs. There it was, in a glass case, resting on dark velvet, a small plaque at its base. The diamonds, like tiny mirrors, reflected the lights of the gallery and the faces of the visitors. People stopped. They read the name. They looked, but no one knew the whole story. How many tears had that tiara witnessed? How many decisions, promises, farewells were locked within its sparkle? No one knew, just as no one knows where it is now. The tiara never appeared in auctions, never entered private collections. Everything suggests it remains with the family, with those who shared with Ileana not only blood, but exile, loss, and faith. And perhaps that is as it should be. Because some things do not belong in museums, nor to governments, nor even to official history. In 2009, nearly 2 decades after Ialena's passing, something happened that felt like a closing circle. The Romanian government returned Bran Castle to her children. The same castle steeped in Dracula legends, where she had played as a girl, where everything had begun. It was too late for Ialena to see it, but not too late for time itself to offer its quiet gesture of respect. History is never in a hurry. It always comes back. And the tiara is no longer just a jewel. It is an invisible thread connecting what was with what remains. A bridge between the balls and the prayers, between the woman who wore a crown and the woman who one day laid it down for good. Perhaps it took reaching the very end to understand. It was never she who carried the tiara. It was the tiara that carried her. Today, when everything demands to be displayed, sold, recorded, the tiara remains silent. It does not seek attention. It does not seek the stage. And in that silence lies its new power. Who holds it now? Who opens a small wooden box and, among family relics, finds this lace of light and stone? Who knows the full story? The one that doesn't fit into catalogs or official chronicles, the one whispered from mother to daughter. Perhaps it will appear again someday. Perhaps it will shine at another wedding, at a quiet family ceremony far from the cameras. Or perhaps it will remain forever in the shadows, like its last owner who wore it in her youth and then put it away for good. There is a kind of poetry in this, a tiara that began as a symbol of power, but ended as a symbol of loyalty, not to thrones nor to titles, but to memory and to roots. It was not sold because it was chosen, not for its price, but for its meaning. Is this the end of the tiara story? No, it simply stepped outside the flow of time. It became a relic beyond time itself, like Ileana herself. Princess, exile, mother, nun. A woman on whose head a crown once sparkled, but in whose heart burned something far greater. The certainty that true greatness needs no throne. That beneath the gold there can be light, not luxury. The kind of light that never fades, even in silence. In the end, when everything has been said and every fact laid bare, a feeling remains, fleeting, like the scent of old letters, like the dust on the glass of a display case where the tiara once glittered. The story of Princess Ileana does not fit neatly into the framework of a biography. It cannot be reduced to dates, names, or titles. It belongs to those lives that continue to echo long after their voice has fallen silent. Ialena left no political legacy. She led no movements, never returned to a throne, never tried to cling desperately to the past. And perhaps that is what made her extraordinary. Because she let go. First her country, then her family, then her name, and finally herself, not in defeat, but in transformation. She did not fight against time, she walked with it, and never lost her dignity. Her life contained everything: dazzling balls and war hospitals, Viennese halls and American kitchens, imperial jewels and monastic simplicity. And all of it lived without pretense, without noise, with the quiet grace of someone who knows the essential things always happen within. When she first put on Napoleon's tiara that evening at Payless under the light of waltzes and candles, she might have thought it was the beginning, but it turned out to be a mirror not of what she possessed, but of who she was. From then on, the tiaras followed her, not as an ornament, but as a witness, a silent companion, a memory woven from diamonds and history. And now, with her gone, it remains, not as a jewel, but as a fragment of life itself. Not only her life, ours too. Because in Ileana, in this woman between two ages, between empire and exile, between wealth and faith, there lies a question that belongs to everyone. How do you remain yourself when everything around you falls apart? Do not surrender. Do not grow bitter. Do not turn away from the world even when it turns away from you. Simply keep walking, with a clear gaze, with a steady step, with a light inside stronger than any crown. That is how legends are born, not on thrones, but in prayer, not in the noise of applause, but in the silence left behind when someone has lived a life with meaning. Princess Ileana is gone, but her light remains. And perhaps, somewhere in a wooden box, the tiara still rests, not as jewelry, but as a reminder. True greatness lies in knowing when to leave the stage and step into the shadows, by choice. Może jeszcze się pojawi, może zaświeci na jakimś ślubie w rodzinnej ceremonii z dala od kamer, a może zostanie na zawsze w cieniu, jak ostatnia właścicielka, która nosiła ją w młodości, a potem schowała na zawsze. I jest w tym coś poetyckiego. Tiara, która zaczynała jako symbol władzy, zakończyła jako symbol wierności. Nie tronowi, nie dynastii, lecz własnym korzeniom i pamięci. Nie została sprzedana, bo została wybrana. Nie dla ceny, lecz dla wartości.